Imagine being poised to reopen or ramp up after months of lockdowns, only to be short one essential part of your business: workers. It's not an uncommon story, and with us for their experience, we're joined in the nation's capital by Lindsey Osborne. She is marketing manager at Rock Brewing Company, and in Little Italy of the provincial capital, Rebecca Sutherland. She is a salon owner and colorist at Hair Artisans. And it's great to have both of you on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
I wonder if I could just get the two of you. Lindsey, let's start with you. Just tell me about your business.
Yeah, so I work for Rock Brewing Company. We're out in Carp, Ontario. It's half an hour from Ottawa's port. We've been open 3 weeks this weekend, actually. So it's great. The community really supports us a lot, but unfortunately, we're not open 7 days a week anymore fully. We are now open 5 days a week because we simply can't find staff to work in the kitchen, and it's very
I'm going to follow up on that in a second. Yeah, Rebecca, how about your business? Where is it? How long you been open? How long you been there? All that stuff.
We've been open for actually 10 years this year. August was our 10-year anniversary. We're at Yonge and St. Clair in Toronto. And we also used to be open 7 days a week, and we're down to 6 days a week, and we're short-staffed 4 of those days.
Well, let's follow up on that since you've both mentioned it right away. Lindsey, when you say you're short-staffed or having trouble getting people, be specific. What do you mean?
Yeah, so I would say normally we have roughly 20 kitchen employees, whether it be full-time and part-time. Right now, we're down to basically a quarter of that. It's crazy. Basically, 2 days a week now, we have our brewery staff volunteering to help out and barbecue just so we can actually keep food going out to the guests. A lot of our staff went back to college and university, but aside from that, we just can't. There's nobody applying. It's like that at every restaurant, I feel like, across the province. It's insane.
And Rebecca, how about in your world?
Similar, like in 2019, we employed anywhere from 7 to 9 people, and we currently employ 3 people. We lost people during the pandemic a variety of ways, and now that we're looking to rehire, we're having a hard time finding people, especially experienced and more senior stylists. We're starting to see some people for the junior positions. The schools are starting to graduate apprentices and new hairdressers. So we're seeing a little bit of interest that way, but it's been really difficult.
Rebecca, where do you think they have gone?
I think there's a few different places. I know that people have left the industry entirely, gone back to school, pursued other creative pursuits. I think there is an underground industry for hairdressers right now that people are working, going to people's homes or working from their own home. And I think when you're locked out of work for so long, you look for something that's going to be a little more secure.
Lindsey, how about in your world? Where do you think the workers have gone?
Yeah, I agree with Rebecca. I think that because of all the lockdowns, people were forced to leave the industry because they had to find something that was stable. They're just worried about when the next lockdown is going to be, when there's restricted, amounts of people that we can have in the restaurant and stuff, and we're forced to lay people off or give them less shifts. They still need to pay their bills, right? So they've been going to different industries, and even, offering to pay them more and stuff. That's not really the issue. It's just they've gone to different industries entirely.
And Lindsey, have you tried, for example, I don't know what, like offering a few bucks more an hour, raising the potential wages they could earn if they were to come back? You have done that.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've raised the wages. Our ownership group has agreed to match the tip out that we normally do anyways. We're out in the country kind of, so you can't take public transit here. So we've even toyed with the idea of paying for people's Ubers back and forth just to get them out here, literally anything. We've basically exhausted every regular avenue. So.
Rebecca, how about you? Have you tried wage increases?
We have, yeah. We've increased the hourly base pay for our staff. We've added paid sick days that weren't something that we used to do before that were typical in our industry. And I guess those are the 2 main things that we've done to try and encourage people and make us look more desirable. But we know that all the salons in the city are looking for staff. So it's also, there's a lot of places looking.
Well, can I ask you a bit of a tricky question here, Rebecca, and you won't get mad at me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted the green light first before I was going to do it.
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe some of the people who once worked for you are out there in the underground economy, working under the table, doing it secretly or surreptitiously? They're still in the business. They're just not doing it with you anymore.
I think that's happening. Amongst my staff that I lost, I know where most people have gone, and that's not the case with people that I've lost. But I do think there are people out there who are earning a living doing hair from their home, and it's underground. It's not going to be reported back to the CRA.
Lindsey, how about you? Is there a similar kind of experience that could be happening in your line of work?
Honestly, here I don't think so. I think they've really changed industries or gone to school for them or into business for themselves. I think we used to have a lot of younger staff too, and I think that those staff are just not working right now and supporting themselves other ways. So,
Lindsey, let me share another thing that I've occasionally heard from people, and that is the jobs they used to do were jobs they did because they needed a paycheck. They didn't necessarily do it because they loved it. And once the pandemic came and showed them how difficult or fragile life could be, they just weren't about to risk their health or anything else for what was, in their view, not a significant enough paycheck anyway. You think there's any of that?
Yeah, that's fair. I think that some people, like the people that are still in the industry, are in the industry because they're passionate about what they do. They love cooking, they love serving guests, they love making people happy. And so those are the people that have remained. For those that were just there for a paycheck, just like any industry, it's obviously understandable. I think there was a lot of challenges in the restaurant industry before in terms of like paid sick days or pay and things like that. And so the pandemic has really shifted that a little bit because there's a lot more benefit to working in the restaurants. But if it was just a job to you and you don't care about doing it, then obviously it makes sense that those people are gone anyways.
Rebecca, how about for you? Do you think that phenomenon has captured your industry as well?
I think in some segments of our industry, that's probably true. But I think there's a lot of people that are creative, artistic personality types. And when they weren't able to do that legit, go to work for 9 months, they found ways to do it, especially because in our industry, we know that the salons were safe. When we reopened after the first lockdown, there wasn't COVID spread happening in salons. So when we were locked down again, that's when I think people went underground because they knew they could do their job safely, taking the proper precautions. And they wanted to continue to make people happy and share those relationships that we build with people and pursue their creative, artistic side doing hair.
Gotcha. I think I've got one more question for you, Rebecca, before our time's up. And that is, now, admittedly, I'm not exactly at my best right now, but look at my hair. Can you do anything with it? What do you think?
I think your hair looks fantastic, Steve. They're taking very good care of you.
Now, are you lying to me? You should never lie to a guy who's suffering from COVID, okay?
No, I think your hair looks great.
Well, whether you mean it or whether you don't,
color?
I'm taking
I could paint some rainbows in there.
No. I'm good. I'm probably the only guy in television who's not coloring his hair, so we're going to keep it that way. It's really good of both of you to join us tonight here on TVO and lay out what the challenges are in both of your industries tonight. So take good care. Lots of luck going forward and stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, with that in place, let's get a wider sense of what's going on and why. And to do that, we welcome in Stratford, Ontario, Kaylie Tiessen, economist and policy analyst working in the research department at the labor union Unifor, and in Burlington, Ontario, Craig Alexander, president, chief economist, and executive advisor at Deloitte Canada. And as I welcome you two to the program, what stands out, Kaylie, among what you just heard? That's obviously a look on the ground. You see the bigger macro picture. What can you add to that?
The one thing that really stands out to me right away is just how much they talked about the uncertainty of whether or not people have transitioned to new industries or what they're doing instead. I think a lot of people have found a way to create employment and income for themselves in places where they weren't looking for it before or didn't know that they could find it. And that's one piece of this puzzle. One thing that I was really curious about, and I'd love to interrogate a little bit more, is when we're talking about job quality, what are the things that are on offer? There was an article recently from the CBC, and it was on Pizzeria Libretto that just talked directly about improving employment quality for their employers or employees and actually being able to find the workers that they needed. So in an industry like hospitality with such a high vacancy rate, that's something that seems like it would work pretty well and shows anecdotally at least that it has so far.
Interesting. Craig, how about you? What stood out?
Well, I think it really summarizes how the hard-hit industries are being affected. And it really highlights how the health risks and the risk that jobs are more precarious In other words, worries that the health risk is still out there. The employees are putting themselves at risk, but at the same time, they're also concerned that the job will go away again if there's new government restrictions. The one thing I'd flag, though, is I think that many people appreciate the challenges that hair salons and restaurants and other hard-hit industries, like hotels, et cetera, are experiencing labor shortages. But I would actually argue that those labor shortages are far more broad. That, in point of fact, across the entire economy, many sectors, if not most sectors, are experiencing some labor shortages at the moment for a variety of different reasons.
Kaylie, do you want to follow up on your first answer? You think there may be something deeper, more systemic at play here?
Yes. I guess what I've been watching for is wondering how transitions will happen and what will transition over time in the economy as consumer demand has changed. We're looking more to people buying online versus going to stores and ordering food online versus going into a restaurant. How will that settle out in the long term is something we don't know yet, but we will know eventually. And then in terms of just thinking through broader labor shortages, I think that's something that was happening long before the pandemic hit. This is certainly not a new topic. And we've heard, in the skilled trades industry, in many other industries, people talking about the need for highly skilled workers or semi-skilled workers. And in fact, we have tons of solutions for that. I know we're going to get to that later, but it's certainly not a new conversation. It's just something that maybe has heightened since the pandemic happened.
Yeah, Craig, let me put a couple of numbers to you and get your take on this, because now let's go back pre-pandemic. January 2020, the unemployment rate in the province of Ontario was 5.2%. Pretty good number. In August 2021, last month, it was 7.6%. 5.2 versus 7.6. How unusual is it in an economy to have a high unemployment rate and a worker shortage at the same time?
The unemployment rate shows you that there is slack in the labor market, that there's people who are looking for jobs but can't find them. And at the same time, we have statistics from StatsCan that shows that in June, there was 815,000 vacant jobs. So we have people without jobs and we have jobs without people. And that tells you that there's a mismatch happening in the labor market. And I think some of it is captured by the interview that we had, like people going back to school who are retraining for retraining. They're going back to get some additional skills development. That's a positive thing. Now they won't actually count as unemployed if they aren't looking for work, but if they're currently upskilling, trying to get into a new job, a new area, a new industry, and they're looking and they haven't been able to get in, well, then they would be counted as unemployed. So it's very clear that that some industries are under enormous pressure in terms of trying to find workers, but they can't find the workers that they need. And simultaneously, there are people who are looking for jobs that can't seem to find them. The other thing that has been commented on, so there's some speculation about, is that the increased generosity of the employment insurance benefits could be having people who are, they're reporting that they're looking for work, but they're not actually taking jobs because they can get those expanded EI benefits. And so there could be a government, there could be a disincentive to work from the current government programs. But that's going to change after September 25. So on the 25th, I think the EI eligibility will drop, and some of that factor will diminish.
Well, you've nicely gone to where I wanted to follow up, and that is, yes, Kaylie, I'm sure you've heard it. Everybody's heard it, that lots of people have simply decided, because of the generosity of unemployment benefits during the pandemic, that they're just going to sit it out for a little while. How much of that do you think is going on?
I think that the changes to the unemployment benefits, as well as the CRB and earlier on the CERB, give workers a lot more control over deciding what sort of job they want to take. And that's something that employers should be thinking about as we move into sort of continuing pandemic and eventually, hopefully, an end. is people want something better for their lives. And that includes higher pay, that includes better scheduling, more fair scheduling, that might include flexibility, it might include more hours at one job. All of those decisions probably depend on what industry an employer and a worker are operating in. But we have all learned that having a little bit less chaos in our lives is desirable. And if you were in a job where you had a lot more chaos in your life through the pandemic, then you have a better idea of what solutions are necessary in order to have a higher quality of life and work-life balance or something along those lines. And so I hope that we'll actually see job quality improve and people and workers demanding better from their employers over time.
Well, okay, but Kaylie, here comes my high tight fastball follow-up pitch. Here goes.
All right.
What you've just said is all very lovely. The question is, should we have gone $350 billion into deficit this past year alone just so that people can have nicer work-life balance, but eventually passing the expenses of that nicer work-life balance onto their children and grandchildren in future higher taxes and deficit payments?
Yes. I think I just hit that right out of the park, right? Yeah, I think that we should. I mean, if the government had not done what it did over the last 2 years, we would have likely seen a further crash in the economy, more unemployment, people being unable to pay their bills, unable to buy food, and that would actually have caused a sort of vicious cycle in the economy, and we prevented that. Could it have been better? Yes. Are there things that we need to fix? Yes, but in fact, we could be building a better economy where more people are included in prosperity and more people have the opportunity to thrive. I hope we don't go back to what we had before. Many people were left out and many people did not have the jobs that they were qualified for, did not have the jobs that allowed them to pay their bills, send their kids to school, participate in sports, have a lovely, safe home life. And those are all things that we should desire in a prosperous economy like Canada. And it's something that we can achieve. And now we've learned that we can work harder to get there.
I do hear you, and I will. I guess I should follow up with Craig on this. And I'm not arguing, and I don't think I've heard anybody argue that we shouldn't have brought in the CERB and done all of those things to protect people during the worst ravages of this pandemic. But having said that, these programs can't last forever. They're not going to last forever. The economy is coming back. People are returning to work. Are you concerned we are at the point yet where we're paying people to stay home instead of get out there and start looking for work again?
Well, I think we are going to see a gradual winding down of the government support programs. And I think that to the extent that the generous income support has been distorting labor supply, particularly at the sort of workers working close to minimum wage or slightly above minimum wage. I think that effect is going to disappear as the programs are wound down. I think we need to be a little careful about how we do sort of armchair quarterbacking, looking back during the crisis and then saying, like, was it the right thing to do? I mean, obviously, if the government's going to shut down the economy to deal with health risk, you actually have to provide support to workers and businesses so that they can do what the government has directed. I think that looking back on the data, you can see that the unemployment rate went up to just under 14%, which is a massive massive labor market shock. But personal income actually increased. In other words, the government transfers to Canadians exceeded the loss of labor income. So was it too generous? Maybe, but I'd be careful to be too critical because we were in the midst of a crisis and it was hard to know what was the perfectly optimal thing to do. And so if you're going to hedge your bet on one side, I think you hedged it in terms of being, too generous, but then you have to take it back. And as now that we've seen the pace of employment rebound, as we've seen the unemployment rate coming down, I do think the government's going to need to wind down those programs. But the one thing I would also highlight is I think the employment insurance system that we had pre-COVID was actually archaic and wasn't actually providing the support that workers needed. That people who work part-time are self-employed, gig workers often aren't eligible for EI, and so the employment insurance system needed to be reformed. And my hope would be, as we wind down these programs to something that has less of a disincentive to work, we also put in place, a much stronger income support framework in Canada.
Kaylie, does this crisis offer an opportunity to fix that?
Yes, it absolutely does. We've been talking about the sort of inadequacies of the unemployment insurance system for a long time, and we've seen that it's possible to fix that. And we know that even when we're not in a mass economic crisis, when someone loses their job, they are in an individual crisis, and we need to make sure that those systems protect people from a longer than necessary individual crisis in income, so that they can go back to school, so that they can continue to pay their rent, feed their families, keep their home, all those things that are necessary to avoid further crisis over time. And that's something that we absolutely have to do. And we do see so many workers who were unable to qualify for EI before, and now they're able to, and that's something that has to continue, absolutely.
Well, Craig, let's follow up on that because, of course, we started our discussion hearing from somebody who worked in the hospitality business in Eastern Ontario, somebody who worked in the hair care business in Midtown Toronto, and we heard about what their experiences were all about. I do wonder how widespread that phenomenon is. I wonder, Craig, whether, I don't know, can you give us a handful of other sectors where people without jobs, jobs without people is still a big problem?
Well, I think it's quite broad. So the industries that were hit the hardest were, areas like retail, accommodation, tourism, travel, transportation, personal services like hairstylists. I mean, these are sectors that were very hard hit because they were deemed to be non-essential businesses, and so they were the most affected by the repeated government shutdowns and the restrictions. I think that the reason we have labor shortages in those areas was very well articulated. I think that there's continuing health risks, and that's deterring participation. I think that there's been people that are worried that if they go back to that sector, you're going to run into a problem that there could be another government restriction that impacts their employment adversely. I think that there have been workers that have taken the opportunity to go back to school to get new skills, and I think actually it could create labor shortages for some sectors, but workers pursuing a new passion and getting increased skills, that's actually probably what we need to see in the economy. But then there's the sectors that also have done very well during the downturn, like financial services and the expansion in demand in healthcare and pharmaceuticals and professional services. And in those industries, you're actually finding that there are labor shortages as well, even though they don't have the health risks and some of the concerns that those other sectors had. They're actually having difficulty finding the skilled workers that they need, because they've actually grown. Their employment has increased. Not only has it recovered from COVID, it's gone way beyond it. And I think one of the key things that's contributing to the pressure on many employers was the loss of immigration during the pandemic. Because if we look back pre-pandemic, between 80-90% of our labor force growth was actually coming from immigration, right? Because of aging population, what we're seeing is more of our population growth is coming from immigration. And then of course we basically lost immigration during the pandemic years, or during the pandemic. And so that too has created like an enormous strain. So, for example, I talked to one employer who is in the pharmaceutical sort of drugstore space, and they're having a lot of difficulty with recruiting general workers. And I think that many of the challenges they're having are like the interviews that started this discussion. But they're also having an issue because they often recruit and bring in pharmacists from that are trained and educated abroad, and that inflow has suddenly disappeared. And so, they can pay the existing pharmacists more, but ultimately there's a supply distortion that's been created by the loss of immigration. So, like, I do think that this is a very broad issue. The one question is going to be, does it actually start to bid up, create wage pressures? I think workers getting paid more, getting workers, more inclusive growth is something we want to strive for. The one thing that's a challenge, though, is it could be inflationary, and that's something we need to be mindful of as well. Because if we get broad wage pressures, it could then lead to higher inflation, which could cause the Bank of Canada raise rates, and with all the debt that's been accumulated, that could be a problem.
Right. We don't want that. All right. In our last minute, then, Kaylie.
But we do want wage growth.
Right. And I noticed Kaylie nodded her head when you said that. So that's somewhere where a chief economist, both for a corporation and for a union, agree. To that end, Kaylie, I wonder whether people watching this right now, and we have a minute left to go for you to answer this, whether people ought to just get more comfortable with the notion that in order to have in your judgment, better and fairer society, we should look forward to paying more for all sorts of stuff.
I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I think that right now we're seeing inflation is a little bit higher than we've seen in the past. That doesn't mean it's something that's going to stick around for the long term. These are short-term increases. When it comes to wage pressures on inflation, I think that we would have seen if robust wage growth was going to cause inflation, that would have been the case already before the pandemic. We were seeing robust wage growth and inflation was right at that target. So we don't need to be sort of fearful of that and creating fear that isn't warranted. And that, in fact, in order to get the inclusive economy that we want, that we've been talking about, that the Bank of Canada is talking about, the government of Canada is talking about, that the OECD is talking about, folks in Davos are talking about, we have to accept that we might need to wait a little bit longer before we increase the interest rate in order to make sure that everyone is experiencing the prosperity that's created by economic growth and not put the brakes on too soon. Then people get left out and we're back to where we were before.
And that's our time. Thanks to Kaylie Tiessen of Unifor, Craig Alexander of Deloitte Canada. It's been great having both of you on TVO tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.